Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alison Lagrange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alison Lagrange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Fresh Israeli airstrikes kill at least 51 and leave over 70 wounded in Gaza. The airstrikes come as the United States pushes for a hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas. Ukraine says it hit a Russian oil depot that provides fuel for the Russian Air Force hundreds of kilometers away from the shared border of the two warring countries. Los Angeles declares a state of emergency after strong winds push large-scale wildfires toward the Hollywood city. More than 30,000 people evacuate as officials struggle to contain the flames. At least 13 Cuban military personnel missing and feared dead after an explosion in an arms depot in the country's east. This, according to Cuba's Defense Department. And the United States determines Sudan's paramilitary rapid support forces committed genocide and imposes sanctions on the group's leader over a conflict that has killed tens of thousands and displaced millions. Hello and welcome. We begin with the latest from the Horn of Africa, a region that has been riddled with violence and conflicts. The United States conducted an airstrike in southern Somalia, killing at least 10 terrorists belonging to the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab group. In a statement, the United States said that at the request of the Somali Federal Government, its Africa Command had conducted a self-defense airstrike on the 31st of December on Al-Shabaab terrorists. The airstrike, which saw no civilian casualty, occurred in Birzani in Somalia, roughly 35 kilometers from the port city of Kismayo. Now, the U.S., which considers Al-Shabaab a threat to its national security, said that in addition to the airstrikes, its forces also provided support to Somali forces by evacuating soldiers who were attacked while fighting the terrorist group in the region. Now, Somalia has endured decades of civil war, frequent climate disasters and jihadist violence from Al-Shabaab and the Islamic State. The Al-Shabaab Islamic group was formed in 2006 as a youth militia to fight the Ethiopian invasion and occupation of Somalia. However, the group has now morphed into a full-fledged insurgency, seeking control of the Somalian territory. It formally pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda in 2012 and is now working to overthrow the Somali Federal Government. The group says it wants to establish a fundamentalist Islamic state. Al-Shabaab controls swathes of territory in the southern part of Somalia, and it has carried out attacks in several parts of the country, including the capital Mogadishu, that have killed thousands so far. To counter the growing threats from Al-Shabaab, Somali forces have also launched several military offensives in recent years. They have also partnered with the African Union to curb their rising influence in the Horn of Africa country.
Our forces are actively engaged in high-tempo offensive operations, successfully liberating numerous areas previously held by Al-Shabaab. To sustain and build upon these achievements, we are increasing our efforts in extending local governance in these liberated areas and ensuring that the gains made on the battlefield translate into lasting peace and stability.
To support Somalia's efforts, the United States has also stepped up its investments, especially after President Joe Biden reversed a 2020 withdrawal decision by President-elect Donald Trump. In recent years, the U.S. has been regularly conducting airstrikes on insurgent groups in coordination with the Somali forces. In 2024, the U.S. conducted 10 airstrikes on terrorist groups in Somalia. In the year before that, it had conducted 15 airstrikes, while in 2022, it conducted 13 airstrikes. In 2021, the U.S. had conducted 9 airstrikes on terrorists in Somalia. But in 2020, during Donald Trump's first term, the United States dropped bombs in Somalia over 40 times. Now, the latest airstrike on Al-Shabaab on the 31st of December comes days after the U.S. had conducted another airstrike on the terror group. On the 24th of December, the U.S. conducted an airstrike that killed a senior commander of the Al-Shabaab group, who was responsible for the group's regional governance for 15 years and played a key role in Al-Shabaab's strategic decision-making. Moreover, the recent airstrikes on Al-Shabaab also followed an attack by the Islamic State terrorists on the 31st of December. In the northeastern Puntland region of Somalia, which was repelled by security forces. So, with Somalia seeing an increase in attacks by terrorist groups day by day, and the government making efforts to counter them, will the United States increase its airstrikes once Donald Trump takes office on the 20th of January? To discuss more on this, we have with us Omar Mahmoud, who is a senior East Africa analyst at Crisis Group and is joining us live from Maputo in Mozambique. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what strategic objectives does the United States aim to achieve through the airstrikes like the recent one in southern Somalia, which was targeting the Al-Shabaab militants?
Well, the United States is locked into a battle with Al-Shabaab, on behalf of the Somali government. This is a legacy of the global war on terror. Al-Shabaab was seen as one of these key organizations that allied to Al-Qaeda, that the U.S. sought to reduce the influence and basically curb its activities. The U.S. views Al-Shabaab not just as a threat to Somalia, but as to the wider region. And so airstrikes like this essentially maintain a degree of pressure on the organization and try to sort of hem it in so it maintains its presence in Somalia and doesn't expand outwardly. At the same time, the U.S. is training an element of the Somali National Army. And so airstrikes like this support that unit while it's out in the field, while it's combating Al-Shabaab.
And how does the airstrike align with the broader counterterrorism strategy of the United States in East Africa? And what implications might it have for regional stability?
Well, the broader strategy is more or less one of containment, basically trying to contain Al-Shabaab into Somalia, trying to basically curb its regional ambitions and its regional capabilities. And if you look at who the group, who in the group the United States has targeted through airstrikes, it usually tends to be individuals who have had some sort of external role with Shabaab or had been involved in some sort of external planning. More so than those that have been primarily localized within Somalia. So I think the strategy is basically trying to contain the group while supporting the Somali government forces so they can increase their capabilities to take on the group within Somalia. Part of what's lacking though is airstrikes can only be part of the solution. You can pound the group as much as you want. They tend to replace their leaders quite quickly. It doesn't really seem to make a massive difference on the ground. Yes, it increases pressure. Yes, it increases costs for the group, but it doesn't eradicate Al-Shabaab. Rather you need an accompanying ground element to that, which is where the training of the Somali army comes in. I would even argue you needed a political element of that as well, given that there is really no military solution to a conflict like this.
Right. And what measures are in place to mitigate the potential civilian casualties during such operations? And how is accountability ensured in case of unintended consequences?
Well, it's a good question, and I think one, the U.S. government should also be prepared to answer. But essentially, I think we've seen over the years an ebb and flow to airstrikes. They're not as frequent as they once were. They do rely on a degree of local information before they're launched, and technologically, there have been some advances in terms of the actual precision of the strikes themselves and whatnot. At the same time, the U.S. Military has opened up avenues for complaints about some of their strikes and whatnot. But we've gotten a lot of reports then at times that communities feel maybe they're not heard, or that they're not really responded to. Their complaints that the U.S. government hasn't really responded to. So I think it remains a work in progress. I think that's still a concern on the U.S. government side, and of course should be a concern going forward, because civilian casualties as a result of airstrikes really only undermines the wider strategic objective, which is basically to reduce Al-Shabaab's capabilities and eliminate sort of support within the population as well for the group.
Right. Omar, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your analysis and valuable insights there.
Thank you for having me.
With counter-terrorism efforts gaining momentum in the Horn of Africa region, another country in Africa has stepped up its fight against terrorists, and that is the West African nation of Mali. The junta-led authorities in Mali have said that at least 30 suspected terrorists have been killed in an attack on security forces. The West African country's armed forces said in a statement that the confrontation took place in the Nioro du Sahel area, and this is located in the western part of Mali. Now, authorities said that the terrorists had infiltrated the city in large numbers and, along with the internal accomplices, had attacked certain sensitive points in the city. Mali's military said that the situation had been brought under control and several weapons had been seized. However, the junta-led authorities did not specify who these suspected terrorists were and what were the total number of casualties in the ensuing attack. Now, Mali has been battling with a political, security and economic crisis for years and has been ravaged by Al-Qaeda and Islamic State factions since 2012. It has also been grappling with a separatist insurgency in the north. Seeing the lack of cohesive response from the civilian government toward the growing security threats, the military decided to take control in back-to-back coups in 2020 and 2021. The junta-led government severed diplomatic ties with its former colonial power France, citing dissatisfaction with the European nation's counter-terrorism efforts. Mali, along with its neighbors, Niger and Burkina Faso, then went on to strengthen their partnership with Russia, securing military assistance to bolster their fight against terrorism, and have since launched several offensives against the terrorists, especially in recent months. Now, earlier this month, Mali's junta captured 2 high-profile figures linked to the Islamic State group in Sahel. The terrorists were believed to have masterminded several deadly attacks in the West African country in recent months. In December of 2024, the Malian army had captured another top Islamic State group figure. Earlier, it said it had killed members of the new separatist alliance formed by the Tuareg rebels. In October of 2024, the junta said that it had killed some 40 terrorists and destroyed their military bases. However, despite these efforts, the junta has also been accused of killing innocent civilians in its counter-terrorism operations. Earlier this month, 8 civilians, including women and children, were killed in the central part of the West African country. Civil society groups and rebels blamed the army and Russia's mercenaries for the tragedy. This has created pressure for the military junta, which has been delaying the handing over of power back to civilian rule and has struggled to contain violence, which has displaced thousands and claimed hundreds of lives. For our next story, we shift our focus to Southern Africa. South Africa is getting tough on illegal immigration. It has been carrying out deportations and has beefed up patrol on the porous borders with neighboring Zimbabwe, a country in deep economic trouble. Since the new coalition government, led by President Cyril Ramaphosa, came to power last year, South Africa has deported and arrested more than 410,000 people at different sites. The coalition of 11 parties that campaigned on curbing migration has promised to speed up deportations. The government has been carrying out raids on buildings and restaurants owned by illegal migrants to make arrests, and these raids have been organized by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Though there are no clear estimates of the number of illegal migrants in South Africa, the last census found that around 2.4 million foreign-born people are living in the country. Almost half are from Zimbabwe, followed by people from Mozambique and Lesotho. South Africa has a history of welcoming migrants. The country's first democratically elected president, Nelson Mandela, had once ordered all electric fences on the borders to be taken down, as he believed in a pan-African approach. But today, his party, the African National Congress, led by Ramaphosa, is facing huge public pressure to step up action on illegal migration. As Pretoria struggles due to high unemployment and a stagnant economy, many citizens are turning against migration. Now, this has also led to xenophobia against other Africans, which has periodically erupted into anti-immigrant violence. At least 18 such incidents were reported last year. Immigration was also a big issue for last year's election, in which Ramaphosa's ANC lost its parliamentary majority for the first time in 3 decades. So, after forming the coalition government, authorities are taking a tougher stance on the issue. In a recent statement, they hailed improved border management initiatives. However, reports suggest that migrants continue to cross in illegally as they have found a loophole. It's the porous Limpopo border between Zimbabwe and South Africa. It is a 225-kilometer border that follows the median line of the Limpopo River. The river is one of the largest in Africa. Here, groups of young men known as Goma-Gomas smuggle people into South Africa for a small fee. Even though the crossing is illegal and dangerous, several migrants do take the risk. Now, the Goma-Gomas promise that they can evade the police and soldiers patrolling the bushes along the river. The Limpopo River's seasonal dryness is a natural pathway for those moving into South Africa from Zimbabwe illegally. Now, even if the officers do catch some migrants occasionally, they are unable to chase away those who jump into the river. As officers say, the river's middle is a no-man's land and they can do nothing. Now, then there is the challenge created by a 40-kilometer fence that was erected in 2020 between Zimbabwe and South Africa at the cost of $2.1 million. But sections of the fencing have been cut. Despite efforts to reinstall the boundary, there are gaping holes in the stretch of barbed wire. Now, these lapses are making many South Africans believe that the recently elected government, which promised to crack down on illicit border crossings, is not that serious in its fight against illegal migration, as it portrays. And staying in southern Africa, while South Africa is taking action against Zimbabwe's migrants, Zimbabwe is taking action against Chinese miners. Zimbabwe's government is scrutinizing a Chinese mining company for severe environmental impact due to its operations in the country. The company in question is Sino-Africa Huijin Holdings. It has been operating a gold mine in the country's east for at least 4 years since 2021. It lies in the Matasa district of the Manicaland province, and the mining firm has been facing accusations of severe environmental destruction and community harm. Several residents have raised issues against the operations. The complaints against the Chinese firm comes after the recent blast that took place at the mine. Apart from the health and environmental impact, locals also say that tremors from the blast have caused structural damage to their homes. The Chinese gold mine has in fact been shut down twice in the past years over a series of complaints. These include widespread ecological damage, the displacement of wildlife, dust pollution, and the potential contamination of water sources due to the alleged cyanide leaching where gold is extracted from ore. The Chinese firm is also accusing of forging signatures on their environmental impact assessment documents. Now, after facing shutdowns in the past, the firm promised to improve the situation. And this is why it was allowed to resume operations. However, it has once again come to the spotlight. However, this is not an isolated case. A recent study has found Chinese mining ventures have led to various harmful repercussions across Zimbabwe. These include environmental degradation, disregard for the cultural rights of the host communities, and also the violation of labor laws. Chinese investors control an estimated 90% of the Zimbabwean mining industry. China remains a major player in Africa's mining sector, with a growing presence in the region. Beijing has reportedly invested in mining in at least 12 African countries, and many of these nations have raised concerns over the Chinese operations and malpractices. It's not just the environment, but Chinese mining firms are also accused of human rights violations. They have allegedly abused miners to extract the key minerals. They have also been criticized for safety issues. Recently, a Chinese-run gold mine was accused for rapidly encroaching on a heritage site in the DRC. In return, the Democratic Republic of Congo's officials arrested 3 Chinese nationals for smuggling 12 gold bars and $800,000 in cash. Apart from unsafe operations, many African nations have also accused China of carrying out illegal mining. And in turn, several African nations have arrested Chinese illegal miners. So while Beijing attempts to increase its dominance in the African mining industry and take away its crucial mineral wealth, the downside of its practices are not being overlooked by the African nations. And with that,